Next version you starts now.
They laughed at him until he proved them wrong. He still remembers the sound, not the words, but the feeling behind them. Laughter. Not loud enough to start a scene, not cruel enough to call it bullying, but sharp enough to stay with him long after the moment passed. It happened when he said it out loud. The dream. The thing he had been thinking about in silence, building in his mind, protecting from the world. And for a second, he believed in it enough to share it. That was the moment everything changed. Because instead of support, he got doubt. You? That's not realistic. You're not built for that. Too small, too slow, too late. Each word landed quietly, but deeply. At first, he tried to laugh it off, pretend it didn't matter, pretend he didn't care. But later that night, when everything was quiet, that's when it hit. Not just what they said, but how easily they said it. Like his dream didn't belong to him, like it was already impossible. And for a moment, he almost believed them. That's the dangerous part. Doubt doesn't need to shout. It just needs to linger. It sits in your mind, replaying the same questions. What if they're right? What if you're not enough? What if this is a waste of time? And that's where most people stop. Not because they can't, but because they start to agree. But something in him didn't. At that moment, something shifted. Not into confidence, not into certainty, but into defiance. Quiet, controlled, focused. Because here's the truth. He didn't need them to believe. He just needed a reason not to quit. And they gave him one. Every doubt became fuel. Every you can't became direction. Not in anger, but in action. Because he made a decision right there. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to explain. He wasn't going to prove anything with words. He was going to prove it with results. And that's where the real story begins. The next morning, nothing looked different. Same room, same routine, same life. But internally, everything had changed. He woke up earlier, not because he had to, but because now he had something to chase, something personal, something that mattered. The first few days were quiet. No one noticed, no applause, no validation, just him, showing up, doing the work, even when it felt small, even when it felt slow. Because he understood something most people don't. Consistency doesn't look impressive at the beginning. It looks boring, repetitive, unseen, unrewarded. But that's where everything is built. Early mornings turned into habit, late nights turned into discipline, and slowly, results started to stack. Not massive, not life-changing, but real. And that's all he needed. Because progress, even small progress, creates belief. And belief changes everything. Weeks passed, then months. The same people who laughed stopped paying attention. Because to them, nothing had changed. But they weren't looking close enough. They didn't see the hours. They didn't see the effort. They didn't see the internal battles he fought every single day. Because there were still moments where doubt came back, stronger, louder, more convincing. Is this even working? What if this still isn't enough? What if they were right all along? That's the real fight. Not against people, but against yourself. And there were nights. He almost gave in, almost went back to comfort, almost chose easier. But then, he remembered that moment, the laughter, and something inside him responded, not this time. Because now it wasn't just about the dream. It was about who he was becoming. And that changed the stakes. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving himself right. That he could endure, that he could grow, that he could become more than what people expected. And that realization took things to another level. He stopped measuring progress by outcomes and started measuring it by effort, by discipline, by consistency. Because he understood something powerful. Results take time, but identity, that's built daily. And every time he showed up, even when it was hard, even when no one was watching, he was becoming someone new, stronger, sharper, more focused. And eventually, the results caught up. That's how it always works. Quiet work, loud outcomes. Suddenly, things started changing. Opportunities appeared, doors opened, momentum built. The same journey that once felt impossible now felt inevitable. And that's when people started noticing again. Not the beginning, not the struggle, but the outcome. And just like that, the narrative changed. The same voices that once doubted now had questions. How did you do it? When did this happen? What changed? But here's the part they didn't understand. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in silence. In the mornings no one saw. In the nights no one stayed for. In the moments he chose discipline over comfort. Again and again and again. That's where it was built. Not in front of them, but despite them. And now, they watched from the sidelines, trying to make sense of something they never believed in. But he didn't stop to explain. He didn't need to, because the results spoke louder than anything he could say. At that moment, he realized something deeper. This was never about revenge, never about proving people wrong just to prove a point. It was about growth, transformation, becoming someone who doesn't need approval, because he built belief. And that's different, because when you chase validation, you lose yourself, but when you chase growth, you find yourself. And that's what happened. He didn't just reach the goal, he became someone capable of reaching it. And that's the real win. Because goals can be taken away, but who you become, that stays. Now, when people look at him, they see success, they see results, they see someone who made it, but they don't see the journey. They don't see the doubt he had to overcome. They don't see the version of him that almost quit. And maybe that's how it's supposed to be, because the work isn't for them. It never was. And when someone finally asks, "What kept you going?" he doesn't give a long answer. He doesn't revisit the past. He doesn't mention the laughter, because it's not about them anymore. It's about him, about the choice he made, when it would have been easier to stop. He looks forward, calm, grounded, certain, and says the only thing that ever mattered: prove them wrong. Not with words, not with arguments, but with who you become. Because at the end of the day, doubt will always exist. People will always question. Voices will always try to define your limits. But none of that matters. If you're willing to outwork the noise, to stay consistent when it's quiet, to believe when it's hard. Because here's the truth. You don't need everyone to understand your vision. You just need the discipline to build it anyway. And if you can do that, if you can stay locked in when no one is watching, if you can keep going when doubt gets loud, then eventually, you won't have to say anything at all. Because your life will say it for you.